Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no copay. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hey everyone, this is a friendly reminder that we are here for entertainment purposes only. We may not even be that entertaining at times, but this is not medical advice. Talk to your doctor, check with your healthcare professionals before making any lifestyle changes or medicine changes. What we're talking about is our clinical experience and what we've seen. And so if you really want our advice, you can consult us. You can actually consult me as a doctor, or you can consult my guest and get all your questions answered. But we can't give free medical advice because we can't pay our bills with that. But we can help to educate you a bit and allow you to think a little bit. And always reach out to your medical professional before making any lifestyle changes. Thank you. Hey everyone, we made it to March. Enjoy this episode brought to you by Health Code. GETHLTH.com. They're doing great stuff. They have a great berberine product that I love that I'm using with my patients. And it has turmeric and anti-inflammatories and all that for us to recover from our hard workouts. Hopefully we're still doing those in March. And also they have their great shakes. Of course, the chocolate macadamia is my favorite. Also, they have their creamy vanilla. They have a vegan option with fermented pea protein, which is their claim to fame right now. They've really reached a lot of people with that. It's expensive to make that, but they're taking a bite to make sure they get that product out to people. So anyways, thank you for listening. Patreon supporters especially, thank you. Greatly appreciate your support. It's less than 1% of the listeners, so we hope that a few more jump on board there so we pay our guys and not have to take another sponsor, hopefully. But again, thank you and happy 2025 to you. Keep up the good work.
Discover a new path to wellness at Arizona Metabolic Health. Dr. Brian Lenzkes offers advanced medicine and personalized care, treating the root causes of your health concerns, not just the symptoms. Whether you're seeking direct primary care, effective diabetes management, or medical weight loss, with a holistic approach, our team is here to guide you every step of the way. Visit ArizonaMetabolicHealth.com today to learn more about our innovative health solutions.
When I stepped on that scale and saw the number 278 pounds, it was like a punch in the gut. I was just sick and tired of being fat, sick, and tired. I knew that I had to make a change. I started to read about the low-carb diet and I decided to give it a try. The weight started to fall off me. I added Health Code on a daily basis to my diet. It's a high-protein, healthy fat meal replacement that is simply delicious, and it's easy to make. And after I have one, I don't get hungry for hours. My strength has improved. My VO2 max has gone up 7 points. I have higher energy levels throughout the day. I want to be healthy enough to throw my grandchildren up in the air and go on hikes up a mountain with them. And I totally believe that Health Code can be an important part of that. I believe Health Code is the best meal replacement shake ever formulated. I wouldn't be taking it otherwise.
Try Health Code risk-free.
Hello and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. I have a real live doctor here with me today. And I think I'm probably going to get triggered a couple times, so bear with me because this is an important topic. I mean, really, I've seen it. I've thought about what she did. She's lived my fantasy life, Chelsea Turgeon, residency dropout. Like that's her book. I would definitely, if you're going into medicine, I would say I haven't read it yet, but I'm going to have to because we had a short time. But yeah, it's like how I quit my medical career to travel the world and work remotely. So Chelsea, welcome. Great to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and just share my story and have a conversation with your community.
Yeah, I can't. I got to hear your story because it's insane to me. So you went through medical school, boards, all this stuff, and then you get into residency. So what happened? What was it? Was it like from the start where you go, maybe I'm in the wrong thing, or were there certain things that triggered you when you go, that's it? Like, did it build up and then you got to that point, or what happened? Tell me your story. Of course, Let's go back to the beginning. It's like, okay, I'm going to be a doctor. I study hard in undergrad. You go through all that, take the MCATs to get into med school. So what happened?
Yeah, I love it. And I'll share the part of my story, and then we can go deeper into any of the pieces that feel interesting for you, because I always try to share it in a way that's like, let's be concise, but then we can dive deeper into any area. So I interestingly was always fascinated in human psychology and potential. When I was 15, I had a subscription to Psychology Today. So like my friends are reading Cosmo Girl and 17, and I'm like every 2 months I get this magazine of Psychology Today, and I like sit there and like read through everything, and I'm soaking in all of this. It was like the evolutionary basis of rejection, and like it was just so fascinating to me. And even before I could drive, I would have my parents drive me to Books a Million, and I was like, I'm going to study there. And I would study a bit, but then I would go to the self-help aisle and like just look through. And it was like before Kindle and before all of that, so I like had to go to the place and like read all of these self-help books, and that was so interesting to me. But I didn't know like coaching was a thing at that point. I was very interested in psychology. That was so clear. And so I majored in psychology in undergrad, and in my mind, there was two paths that I could take from that, because I think the way we're all conditioned for careers, we have very limited perspectives of like, you get this degree, from this degree, there's these like branch points you can take. And so I was just very much in that conditioned mindset of, okay, I can get a psychology degree and then I can go into medicine and do psychiatry, or I can go into like grad school psychology and kind of go from there. And when I present those options to different people, as I'm talking to, everyone asks, what are you majoring in? What are you going to do? I present those options. And I just notice every time I present that, I say like maybe med school, I get like, ooh, you're gonna be a doctor. Oh, like there's just like so much societal validation I was met with
Mm.
around that. And I know looking back, that was such a big influence for me of like, like I want to be impressive to other people. I want to achieve, and I want to like I was smart enough to do it. And so I was like, you know what, let me just go for it. And really when I look back, I see that that was a huge, like I didn't have my own compass. I didn't have my own way to connect to myself. And so I just chose medicine, honestly, because I was like, other people are impressed by this career path.
Yeah, and that's not uncommon. A lot of people, a lot of people. Oh, and maybe not nowadays. Like we've lost a lot of respect over the last several years, but a lot of people say that. It's like, and the other thing is, a lot of us I looked at it too, and I was like, well, if you're a doctor, you may not be rich, but you're always going to have a
Stable.
career.
Yeah.
You're going to be stable somewhere, and you're not going to like, if the stock market changes, or you're going to be out of a job, or if the technology changes, like, okay, pretty much you got a job. And so for a lot of us, it was like the safe pathway, right? Like not being a mechanical engineer or something like that, where all of a sudden no one needs your skills anymore, right?
Yeah. And I really did think at the time too that I wanted to just work all the time. I was very into like career and what I was doing. And I really became, so I went to med school and I became very like one-dimensional through that process of all I was doing was focusing on studying and going to the library. And I lost track with a lot of my college friends. And I think you talked about like sometimes you ask patients, like, what do you do for fun? And they can't answer. And it's like, I couldn't answer, because what is fun? That fun's not productive. Fun's not something I can like,
Yeah, and
add to
and
check off.
and in med school, you're always studying. Everyone's like, "Oh, we're going to celebrate." I don't have time for that. I got work to do. I got to study. I got to study, and the boards and all these things that we have, the pressures. And you're right. You get into this like pigeonhole where you're just putting your head down and working hard, right?
Yeah.
Memorizing stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was on that like path of achieving, and I just like had it in my head. If I like score really well on step one, then I can go into any residency that I want to, and then that'll be my ticket out of Alabama, because I grew up in like small town rural Alabama, and I always wanted to get out, but I through all of the in-state tuition, and I just like kept staying in state, but I desperately wanted to get out. And so I was like, okay, this is my ticket out, study really hard, do as well as I can, and then you can go anywhere. And I did. I did great on the board exams. I was top of my class in medicine. And I kept thinking if I just achieved more, that I would feel better, or that something would happen. And I couldn't even articulate it at the time. But it was just this sense of like, once I achieve this, things will feel differently. And I kept having these moments where I achieved everything I thought I needed to achieve and wanted to achieve, and it would feel empty. Like I remember getting my step one score back and sitting on this bench and looking at it and being like, oh, I mean, it's great, but it still felt
Yeah. Where do I get the big joy from this, right?
yeah, yeah. And that's
Yeah.
because I had completely like pigeonholed myself, like you said, gone totally one dimensional. And there was no other outlets for joy. And I wasn't there's so many reasons why I wasn't fulfilled by this one particular achievement. But then I really early on decided I didn't want to do psychiatry. because I didn't like the doctor-patient relationship within psychiatry. So kind of the initial reason I went
It's
to
changed dramatically. I mean, when I see that, people go, my psychiatrist goes, how's your meds? Any side effects? Here you go. Like,
yeah,
they don't talk to you, they don't engage,
yeah,
and that's a
yeah.
wild thing. And then they go, oh, go talk to a psychologist. I'm not dealing with that. I don't get paid for that.
Yes. Yeah. And it's like, so even if I, went through training and then ended up doing my own thing where I did practice more holistic psychiatry, it's like, that's such a long road. I was like, I don't want to go through this. I don't want to do a psychiatry residency. That's not something, and that was immediately clear to me during my first medicine, like med school rotation. And then I basically chose OBGYN because that's what I hated the least, if I'm being super honest about that. There was a lot of movement and momentum, and people were young. There was resolutions to problems pretty quickly. So
And
that
where were you doing your residency?
I did my residency in Pittsburgh.
Was it in a smaller hospital or a big like
No,
university?
so I went from
University.
small town Alabama med school, where that's where I did my clinical rotations, to then this like high volume place in Pittsburgh that was like the referral center for the tri-state area, and it was really hectic. So
Wow, yeah, because the reason being the reason I ask is I went to USC and when we did OB/GYN rotation, I was like, everyone was miserable. Like they hated life.
mm,
Like there was only one guy that was really cool that I connected with, but everyone else was like really. But as you think about it, you're waking up at 2 in the morning, you got to rush in, you have emergency ectopic pregnancies and all these crazy things going on, and it's a lot of stress. And you go, oh, I don't want to live my life like that. I mean, I knew right away. It's like surgery and that, like in surgery, I knew my buddy. We went in to observe some, when you're a med student, and he put his hand on the tray to look to see the surgery, and every eye in the operating room looked at him like, you just contaminated our entire, you ruined everything. And it was hilarious. He goes on to be a surgeon after that, but it was hilarious because I'm like, you just touched the dang tray. Everyone, like, put your hands behind your back and stand there and be
yeah,
quiet and don't say anything,
yeah,
right?
no, you don't. Yeah, you keep in your own. Yeah, yeah. And so I think I had a lot of friends who were initially wanting to do OBGYN in med school, and then they decided not to for lifestyle reasons. And I totally see that now, but I guess at the time I was like, I can't see myself doing anything else, because every other rotation, I didn't even want to be there at all. Like I felt
Mm-hmm.
like I'm just sitting here talking and doing nothing. And I think to me, there was the action component of OBGYN.
Yeah.
Like there's the quick resolution of like someone comes in, they need birth control. You can insert an IUD, and you feel like there's just like this short loop of problem resolution, and like pregnancy, a little bit longer of a loop, but it's a 9-month thing where things are happening and you're not even checking things off, but things are just coming to cycles of completion. Other than like chronic disease management, that wasn't interesting to me. And I didn't want to do anything with bowels. So general surgery was just not
Yeah.
going to happen for me. So all of that, it just kind of became the thing I hated the least. And that's what I chose. But then during fourth year of med school, I don't know how yours was set up, but mine, we had a lot of time to, like, we went on interviews and we had just like kind of gap rotations, and I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
as busy anymore. And so I actually had a moment to be like, oh, like hobbies, interests. Like, what do I do? How do I start kind of becoming a person again at this point? And I actually um, looked into meditation. I started getting really interested in like meditation and hiking, and had this huge kind of values and perspective shift at that point, of really coming into a whole different perspective on life and just,
And
yeah.
just being able to breathe and say, okay, let me
Mhm.
reassess what I'm doing, where I'm at in life. Like
Ah,
so many people in medicine never take that time. Yeah, because you're so
ah,
distracted trying to get into residency. And then residency is another crazy thing is that you don't know there's a match and you have no idea where you're gonna end up. And they rank you and you rank them. And I was like, oh, I could either be here, here, or here, like depending on just by how the interviews went. And so that's a crazy thing too. It's like not, you don't know where you're gonna end up away from your family,
yeah.
especially coming from a small town.
Yeah. And I wanted to end up away from everything. And I did. But yeah, during that time, that's when I actually, everything really started to shift for me. I like started listening to, there's this one spiritual teacher who was saying things like, you can't have a happy ending to an unhappy journey. And that
Mm.
really got
That's
me.
so true. Yeah, that is everyone listening. That's worth the price of admission here, which is zero, but it's still worth a lot. It's gold.
Yeah. Yeah. And that started to click with me, like, oh, this is why I'm unhappy through this whole journey, because I keep waiting for the thing at the end to make me feel differently. But really, who I'm becoming in the process of trying to achieve everything is not someone that I want to be. It's not in line with my values. It's not like, I don't feel healthier. I don't feel more well through this process. And so I just started to reevaluate everything during fourth year. I wasn't ready to give it all up yet. So I still went into residency, and I did about a year. I did a full year of residency before it was very clear to me that I didn't want to keep practicing. And I wanted to make sure I like gave it a proper chance and I didn't want to quit. Like I had a moment during maybe a couple of months into intern year that I felt like, oh, I don't know if this is what I want to do, but I was thinking, I want to make this decision from a place of like, I don't want to quit because it's new and it's hard and I'm not good at it yet. I want to go through this process of really getting better and then make that decision. And so then it was a few months into second year that I really hit a burnout rock bottom, that I took a 5-week leave of absence, and it really kind of forced me to take some time to myself to reevaluate what I was doing, what I wanted. And I had a lot of deep experiences of like connection to self during that 5 weeks that made it really clear that it was time to leave.
And it had to be, I could imagine, because I when I was in residency, there was a guy, as a matter of fact, on my birthday, I get called by the chief resident, goes, "Hey, Brian, happy birthday." I'm like, "Oh, thanks." He goes, "Oh, by the way, the guy who was supposed to be doing the ICU this month just dropped out of the program. He's having a personal problem." Like, you kidding me, right? Because I was the second backup called guy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, right now I have this cush rotation, outpatient stuff that's super easy. Now I have to go work in the ICU. Twice it happened to me. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. What's the odds of when I'm the backup guy that I get called in twice during residency? But the thing is, in your case, like, and because you think we all had those moments where you think, you know what, I experienced depression like just for a short period, like an hour or two, just because you're exhausted, you're tired, you're beat up, you're dealing with all this stuff, and at some point you go like, I could be doing something different. And like, because what we go through and train, especially back then, it was like, you'd be in the hospital for 4 days, sleep 3 hours in 4 days, maybe something like that. And it was just crazy what we went through. And then it was like a rite of calling. So everyone had to do that. It's like, oh, I had to do this, so you have to do it. It's like, no, it's stupid. It's stupid because you can't remember your own address by the time you're done with a rotation. And you're supposed to be taking care of people and be compassionate at the same time.
Yeah. And it's like when you're going through, anytime you're going through something like so deeply challenging, the gift of that is that it forces you to come back into why am I doing this? What's the point of this? Is there a reason for this? And if you do have a deep enough why, it's like these deep roots in the ground that can like keep you anchored even when things are difficult and even when there's so much, and you can grow through something like that. But when I was coming back into why am I doing this? Like, this is a lot. This is not like, you can't just phone in this job or just, it's not a casual, like just finish residency. This requires all of you to do. And when I came back to why did I go into medicine? What came to me is like, well, I wanted to help people live healthier, happier lives, right? That was kind of my thing from the beginning, is healthier, happier lives. And then I asked like, well, am I doing that right now? And the answer was like, it's, sometimes I am, sometimes there's moments, right? Not as much as I would like to, but yes, sometimes. But then I asked myself, am I living a healthier, happier life right now?
Wow.
Very clear no.
Yeah. And that's exactly when I left the system in 2020, right before COVID hit. That's exactly the question. I was looking at these things going, okay, Ben Bickman, who's a friend of mine, he's a longevity guy at BYU, metabolic health stuff. And I ran into him at the gym. We were working out before a conference. And I go, Ben, look, if I want to live a long life, what do I got to do? He goes, oh, Brian, that's easy. 5 things. He goes, number one, don't be working 18 hours of stressed out and running around like an idiot all day. I'm like, oh, what's number two? And at that time I was in a really, really, really busy practice. Number two, get enough sleep 7 or 8 hours a night. And I'm like, Ben, your rules kind of suck so far because I'm 0 for 2, right? He goes, yeah, that's why doctors die before everyone else. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, eat real food, exercise regularly, right? And eat real food, exercise. Oh, don't smoke or drink to excess. And I was like, yeah. So most of those things I'm doing, but you start looking and I go, what am I doing here? And I think like when you're talking, I'm thinking if they had mandatory 5 weeks of downtime during residency, I wonder how many people would drop out of medicine.
Yeah.
Because you go, oh my gosh, I have a life. I can see my friends. I can like, because we're isolated basically. It's luckily I was married and have a great marriage, and that helped me get through. But I was thinking if I was single and you're trying to date and you're trying to figure out your life goal, especially in females, right? Because I have a lot of friends that don't have kids and they're not married and they're 42 years old now and they're looking, going, gosh, dang it, what did I do with my life? I've been dedicated to this career that's killing me.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you talk about like those, at least the first two things of health, like don't work those 18 hours. It's like time, I think, is one of the biggest things that prevents us from being able to like be well as physicians, because there's just not time. And that's been one of the biggest gifts that's opened up for me since leaving, is feeling like I don't feel this constant rush of like I need to be brushing my teeth while I'm like packing my stuff, and like I need to multitask in this really ridiculous way. I just feel like I have time. And when you have time, you can think more clearly, you can prioritize your health. And I just think it's this huge gift that we don't.
Yeah, and having time and not being rushed. Like for me, people would ask me like, "What's it like being a doctor?" And I said, it's like I'm on a treadmill that's running too fast, and I could keep up right now, but I know in 10 years I can't keep this pace." And it's like my first year in practice, like I'm gonna bust my butt, I'm gonna prove myself, show everyone I'm a good doc and I'm a good partner and all those things. And then all of a sudden you're in for 18 years, you're like, I have no life still. I'm working my butt
Yeah.
off, and friends are like, "Hey, let's do something on Friday." It's like, Friday? No, I don't think so. Like lunch, I never left for lunch ever, because if I did, I'd be there an extra hour at night and I wouldn't see my wife and kids. So I was like, just work through lunch. Like you said, you're multitasking, trying to figure out stuff, and people don't realize the impact of that. And I think a lot of doctors don't really
Yeah.
realize that, because in my practice, it was like people would say, "Oh, I only slept 2 hours last night. I'm great. I'm fine. Like I can do this." And you realize like that's going to have a toll on you, right? Especially when you don't go home and spend time with your kids and you're burned out and you're not enjoying, and this tension like you're in constantly,
Yeah.
especially in OB/GYN and those kind of, you go, man, being in that environment all the time is not healing. Now, traveling the world and doing what you're doing and working remotely, like kind of what I'm doing now, you go, yeah, I could do this forever. And that, just one more point is, one day, one of the big aha moments for me, my wife was like, she would always ask me, "How was your day?" And I was like, I got yelled at by three people because they had to wait to get in. I had this, I had this. It was always like negative. Like it wasn't like, "You went to medicine to help people." She goes, "You do volunteer work in Guatemala and El Salvador. And when you
Mhm.
come in, when you are there, you're working twice as many hours. Like there's like lines of people coming from all." And she said, "How come you're like on fire for like a month after that, like super recharged, like, doing volunteer work?" I said, because there's an appreciation, and I don't have to live by like uh appeasing the insurance companies, like noting and documenting all this stuff. And over there, I'm treating patients and being a doctor. That's what I went into this for, and you start realizing how the system is just beats us down.
Yeah. No, and I think that is so interesting for you to like, it's like to compare those moments of like, what's the difference? Because it's like you're working more, you're
Mhm.
you're seeing tons of people. And so it's not the fact that there's lots of patients coming in, but there's just something about like you're probably sitting more like face to face, just like in the humanity with them. And there's less computer things getting in the way. And there's less, like you said, documentation and worrying about all the protocols. And so yeah, I think when you have those two juxtapositions, it's a really powerful way to figure out what matters to you and like what you really want and like what's going to energize you, because that's like my whole thing now is how to like burnout proof your career by finding the work that energizes you instead of like just getting through work that drains you, and you only have so much to give and you're going to end up getting depleted throughout the day.
Yeah, I think that's such a critical thing, and I think a lot of doctors, hopefully, a lot of doctors do listen. And it's a hard thing. And the other thing I'm thinking the whole time while you're talking is, you once you get to like it was crazy when I was at USC. They would like, you go through your first year, and then the second year they raise the tuition, third year they raise it like more. And what are you gonna do, drop out? Like there's nothing you can do. You're a hostage to that system. And then once you are done with med school, I had $400,000 worth of med school loans and like, cost of living stuff to be, stay in my apartment and get food and all that kind of stuff, because you're not making money, and you're spending all this money on parking permits and whatever, books and, microscopes and stethoscopes and all this, and you're
And for the
broke.
board exams, like
So
all
you're
of
stuck. And so how did it go when you go, "I'm done with this"? Like, how did your family go, let's
yeah.
reassess this? Like, what was the reaction among your colleagues and your, people that were your friends?
Yeah, it was so interesting because when I took my 5 week leave of absence, it was really from this lens of like, I think a lot of people in my program knew, and my family, I like was telling them, like, this is sort of my moment. I'm not just trying to recover from burnout. I'm trying to make a really big decision about if I want to continue being a doctor. And for me, it was never about, do I want to change programs or do I want to do a different specialty? I was like, no, like I could try that, but I knew like it's either I'm gonna do this or I'm just not. Like those were my two choices. And I was so protective of my own mental space during that time. So I didn't talk to anyone, like anyone who asked like, oh, do you want me to, like, do you want to talk through it? Do you want to,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're like,
like shoot the different ideas? And I just was so protective of my own decision-making process. And all I did was like connect my intuition and do it within myself so that I could feel really clear. And so when I made that decision, by the time I made it, I felt so deeply grounded in myself that other people had all kinds of opinions. It was very wild to notice, like people that I was close to, but then also people I had like really never talked to before, because I worked for 90 days after giving my notice. And I did some like surgery still. So I was like having one-on-one time with like different attendings, like different private practice attendings in the area. And I just had some very interesting conversations from people who were triggered in different ways by me choosing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
that's a trigger. I mean, that's an
yeah.
amazing. I'll never forget this one guy, and I would always look at him and go, "You poor guy, you're gonna burn out." Because in med school, he was like riding all the muscles and attachments and all that on his body, on his arms. And he was like so intense and so stressed all the time. And then one day he's not there. I'm like, "Hey, what happened to so and so?" And they go, "Well, he wants to be a scuba instructor in Aruba." And so like and I actually talked to him and he goes, "Look, my dad's like high up at Apple. I got money. I don't need this. I don't enjoy it. I don't like what I'm doing. What the hell am I doing here?" He goes, "I love scuba diving." So everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, it's so sad. Look what happened to him." I was like, sad. He's helping like people are on vacation all the time and he's taking them scuba diving and they're having a blast. He's making good money doing it. It's
Getting
like,
vitamin D.
yeah, he's getting
He's
vitamin D.
okay.
He's chilling. And I go, "We've been sitting here studying for 14 hours straight." And he's out there having fun with people, like showing them new reefs and stuff that he has a passion for. Like, that's an important thing. You find your passion. You go, "That's not sad. That's like he goes, forget this. It's too stressful." Because he would have not have been a good doctor either. Because he hated everything. He goes, "I don't like this. What am I doing?" So that's what you did. It just took you a little bit longer, like during
Yeah, it took
residency.
me a little longer, but I did like, so I think like from the money standpoint too, like I did have student loans. Like I had a little bit of a scholarship, but I still had like over $100,000 of student loans. And for a while that did keep me like mentally stuck. Like for the
Yeah.
whole first year of intern year, even when I had moments of I don't want to stay, I was like, but I can't leave. Like, what else would I do?
And
And
then what are people going to think of me too? They're going to go, "Oh, you're a quitter. You're the," you know what I mean? They don't realize that you have to realize I want to have a life and I want to do things I enjoy. And I want to, if I don't have a passion for it, it's weighing just like what we do in medicine is the risk and the benefits, right? If a lot of us knew the risk and the benefit, we would say, "Wait a minute, what am I doing?" But like you said, we're in this focus that I'm going to be a doctor, and when I get there, I'll be happy, and when I get this, I'll be, I'll be able to. And the worst thing, and one of the best advice I ever got was during residency. One of the big cardiologists, who was a very quirky guy, but he said, "Brian, never allow your lifestyle to dictate how you practice medicine." So I was like, what he meant was like all these people get their MD degree and they go buy the biggest car, they get their new Tesla and they get this, and they're so in debt that they're stressed out, they're working tons of hours, then they end up getting divorced, losing their car, losing their house, losing everything because they want to impress everyone by what they've accomplished, right? And not say, live below your means and you'll be happy. Because he lived in the same house for 50 years or something, like 30 years. And so you realize, yeah, you don't need to impress everyone, but so many people want to prove that they've arrived, right?
yeah, well, and they've just been deprived for so long too. And like,
Yeah.
working so hard. I think there's also a thing about like stress and like misalignment and burnout, and then trying to do things to kind of relieve that. And sometimes like spending and doing things like that feels like it's gonna make us feel better. I would always like go on a shopping spree after a test weekend because I was like, I deserve this, but
Yeah,
it's
you work so hard, right? Yeah.
yeah, but it's not really like the self-care deserving thing that you really need, because if you're spending money that's loans that you don't have, then that's not help.
And the other crazy thing that I noticed that happened to a lot of us is we would study, 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 and you push through and you do that final test, you get done. The next day you get sick. You get sick
Yes,
because you push through
always,
so hard,
always.
and then all of a sudden your body goes, "Oh, you can relax. Okay, I'm gonna let you get sick now and slow you down." And you're sitting there like, "Oh, my only week off, I'm sick. It's
Yes.
miserable."
I would always get sick after exam weeks. That always happened for me.
So then what? You go,
Yeah.
"Okay, I got these finances. I'm gonna leave. I got 100,000 in school loans." Because again, a lot of us are hostage. I just paid off my school loans 2 years ago. Right? I'm 55. I
Congratulations.
was 53.
Yeah.
Everyone, and I paid like way more than I had to all the time so I can get it. But you go, "Oh, gosh, you got to be kidding me," because you're a hostage now, right? So a
Yeah.
lot of
So
doctors are, yeah,
I just decided to negotiate my hostage situation with myself. And I decided it was just like a mindset switch for me. Really was the biggest thing. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to pay my loans $1 at a time. And I'm not going to, like, even if I die and I never pay them back, I don't care. I'm going to do my income based repayments. And that's just what I'll do. And
Yeah.
I felt such a pressure for so long to not just pay them, but to pay them off quickly so the interest doesn't, take over. It's like this big monster.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There you go. It is what
Yeah.
it is.
And
Yeah.
then
It's a
I
big
just
monster one bite at a
decided
time.
to, yes, exactly. I just decided to not care. And I can't even tell you how unbothered I am by having them. I still have them. I'm barely making a dent because I'm paying about $200 a month. And even now when I could pay more and I could put more to it because now like my business is doing well and supporting me, I don't want to because it's not my aligned way to spend my money. And it doesn't bother me at all. Yeah, I'm doing a podcast episode coming up soon of like how little it bothers me that I have loans. And it's really a decision that you can make. And when I look back on the past, it's 6 years ago that I left. When I look back on those 6 years, if I had stayed because I needed to pay back my loans, or if I had stayed for different like financial reasons, I would have missed out on so much. And this was like my prime. Like I'm 33 now. I left when I was 27. I would have missed out on such a beautiful time of life where I'm like traveling the world. I've been to 55 countries now. I've like met friends all over the world. I've like helped people in different ways. I can't even imagine having stayed because of the money.
You would have wasted your talents, right? I mean, really,
Yeah.
that's putting in IUDs versus like really saving someone's life and really impacted them, and especially with physicians, because and the sad fact is like we are the number one suicide uh, I want to say business occupation
Yeah.
in the world, like
Yeah.
us, the ones
Yeah.
who dedicate our lives to helping people. Because I think what you're saying is so true. You get in there and go, am I helping people or not? And for me, the reason I went into internal medicine, I had this old doc when I was at USC, and super cool, like, but he goes in there with his patient and he's just talking to them. He's not doing anything. I'm like, what are you doing? What's this guy doing? He's not even asking about their medic. He's not asking anything of importance. And then we
Yeah.
get out of the room and he goes, okay, Brian, did you observe like they're not depressed anymore? They're eating better. They're interacting with their family and friends. And I was like, he just made a conversation with the person. Like, but that was the medicine that he was doing because he was connecting with them and talking to them, and they were a friend and they were happy to see him. But you go to some of these big companies, they have 9 minutes, right? The doctors have 9 to 12 minutes to address all your problems. They think, okay, here's a pill, here's a drug, here's a, because we get paid more if we give all the drugs out. And you start realizing, what the world are we doing? Like, this is crazy. You don't connect at all with people anymore. Like you're a number, and they go, you're number 1856. Okay, what do you want? Hurry. I can only
Um,
address one problem today. Come back next week if you want to talk to me about other stuff.
yeah. And it's so hard because like the people who do go into medicine, most of us, we're not in it like so that we can make a bunch of money or that we can be flashy. Like sometimes those are pieces that are part of it. But like you go into medicine because you have like you're a people person to some degree. Like you want that connection. You want to be with people in those deep moments. And that we really get robbed of doing that on a regular basis in the way the current healthcare system is set up. And then the people that we are, it's like we're so sensitive and like open, and we just become hardened from that process of like, then we're like, okay, we need to fit into the system. So we need to get faster at charting. The amount of people who come to me and they think their problem is time management and they think it's a them problem. And they think if they take a charting course or if they learn how to multitask better, like, and I'm like, that's not it. We're all just trying to get really good at a game that we were never supposed to play.
You know, I warned everyone I was going to get triggered. That triggers me, right? Because I remember spending so many times, how do I be more efficient? How do I be more
Yeah.
efficient? I got to see more patients. I got to be more efficient. So I worked so much and spent a lot of money on efficiency, dictating after the patient left. I never believed in turning my back to the patient and typing, I want to interact and be there with you. But I still have notes to write. So I'm seeing 20 patients a day. I have 20 notes I got to write. And plus I got to deal with insurance companies and argue to get stuff from my patients. And it's crazy how much you have to go through. And I think burnout is for the compassionate people, because if you're compassionate, you really do want to help the other people. But a lot of people will just go, I'll just be a robot and see as many patients as I can, and I'll get them in and out, and I won't engage, because it's kind of a joke in medicine that we address all your problems, and then I put my hand on the door to leave, and they go, oh, by the way, I'm going through a divorce, and you're like, oh no, now you just open a can of worms, and I got to talk to you about it. Because the reality is that's the most important thing, is if you're going through a divorce, you're going to have stomach pain and headaches and neck pain, and you're going to have all this stuff. And Tylenol is not going to fix that, or like anxiety medicine is not going to fix that. How do we deal with what's going on underneath? And what I was seeing is so many of the doctors I worked with were totally dysfunctional in their personal lives. And you go, oh my gosh, like there's doctors seeing 50 patients a day, but at home they're a disaster. And one of the big things for me when I resigned it was amazing because it was actually at the same time when Kobe Bryant died, and I was like, you know what? He would give up everything, all of his money, everything for one more day with his family. And I'm like, would I be willing to do the same? I'm like, yeah, I would. I'll give it up. I'll walk away, and if I don't make it, I don't make it. But the point is, I can't be working 18-hour days every day and going home being exhausted. My kids want to show me their schoolwork or something. I'm like, okay, I'm just staring at you, not even engaging, right? I didn't want to be that person. And you see that you lose, like what you're saying is so important. You lose your humanity at some point because you're so burned out yourself, and you're like, you think you got problems? Like you're hearing your patients telling you their problems. You're like, you and I
Yeah.
did this week. I haven't slept like 4 hours. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, yeah, you lose your ability to relate to people because it's like everything you're going through is so much worse than them. And so it's like, okay, I'll fake some empathy.
Yeah,
But
you're like, get over it. Come on now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like you were saying about how we can be a disaster in our personal lives, but then we're trying to help people. And I think that's a really interesting part of the medical profession. And I don't know how yours is different now that you're doing direct primary care and doing your own practice, but it was so interesting to me how in medicine there was never an emphasis on like being an example of health so that to heal patients in that way through like your lived example and through the way that you are in.
Yeah, that's a huge point. Is that was me. I'm like, okay, I'm a hypocrite if I'm working 18-hour days and not sleeping,
And we
right?
have
Even
to
though I'm
be.
trying to do the other things, like how do you
Yeah.
work out when you're working 18 hours? You're gonna go work out for an hour that you can spend with your family. Like you have these decisions, they're both good for you, but you go, which one do I pick? Right?
Yeah.
Okay, last week I worked out. Okay, I'll be with my family this week. And then, all these trade-offs that doctors have to do, and you realize um really what you're saying is if you're not enjoying the journey, that end of the road is not going to be rewarding for you. If you hate your job, and at some point I'm like, you know what? Take off. Like I remember I won these awards from the HMOs for patient service, whatever. All this, I'm like, throw it in the garbage. I'm done with it. Like I don't care what the insurance company says about me. I really cared about what my patients thought, right? But the only way to build that relationship is spending time. Like you said, time is our most critical thing. So if I'm spending time with people, like, I really want to have an impact with them, because when you realize you're just seeing a lot of patients and not really changing their lives. But if I say, look, so what I would do is I would put my patients who are going to get diabetes right before lunch, and I would just work through lunch and spend an hour with them. The problem is in an HMO system, a lot of the patients are like, just throw a drug at me. I'm not going to change. I'm not going to give up my beer and pizza every night, right? I'm not going to change. So it's like, okay, I'm taking time away from my family right now to try to help you, and you don't care. So what I found is doing the podcast, I would have people, I'd be at a conference and someone will say, you saved my life. And I was like, I've never met you before. And they go, remember this day when you said this, or you had this guest who said this? I just sat back and thought, oh, I got to make changes. And when they do that much better, right? So you were asking about direct primary care. Now it's like I can choose my patients. If patients aren't invested in their health, I could say, I know your ship is going out to sink, and I don't want to be part of a sinking ship. Throwing a bunch of drugs on you is not the answer. We got to make some lifestyle changes, right? If you're stressed all the time, telling you to breathe and do things when you're stressed and tense and hate the world and you have a bad attitude, I can't help you really. No drug's going to help you change that. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And so then, yeah, you get to work with people now who have more of their own, like taking responsibility and like having an agency towards changing. But then you also get to see how, like, when we do work, like writing books or putting podcasts out there, there's this deep impact that can happen there for people who are ready to change without us having to be directly engaged. Although it's nice to like hear the feedback and then be engaged afterwards. But I think, yeah, there's so much potential for changing lives that is not maybe in the way we initially thought. It has to be one to one, sitting down in a room wearing the white coat. It doesn't always look like that.
Yeah, and also I think so many doctors. I know for me for sure. Like I would spend my weekends catching up on charts to get ready for the week, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Monday's tomorrow. Oh my gosh, my life is over for another week, right? Like you live for the weekends, and so becomes an issue where like it's hard for you to really relax and be calm and to sit on the beach and think about nothing for an hour. You're like, oh my gosh. As a matter of fact, I was at a conference. Rob Sivas, who's a friend of mine, and he's a Type A surgeon, super hardcore guy, and he gave this talk on like. Dopamine fasting, like just sitting on the beach, not answering texts. And I was sitting there and I could feel my heart going, if I take a day and I don't answer any emails or messages, I'm going to have like, I'll never catch up ever. You're going to die because you'll never catch up because you have so many calls and so many responsibilities all the time that if you let down for a couple hours, you're never going to get out from under that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something wild about how much input we have. I did a like off the grid experience in Mongolia like last fall, where it's like we literally don't have cell service and we're like living in yurts with these nomadic Kazakh people and completely off the grid. And the amount of like the way I slept, the way I like didn't have a to-do list, that was wild to me. I like would wake up and I was like, there's no to-do list. And having that, it was just like a week of fully off the grid. But then some of us would like open our phones and like check and kind of re-engage with the world. And this one girl who did, she literally had nightmares the day that she opened her phone. Like she checked her phone one night and then slept horribly that night. And it was just this really clear juxtaposition of like what stresses us. And then we actually got to have conversations with the Kazakh people. And I decided to ask them like, what is your source of stress? Like living this nomadic lifestyle, like do you even have, and it took a while with our interpreter to like explain what stress meant.
Yeah, like stress. What's that? Yeah.
But then he came back and he literally just said winter.
Mm.
I was like, fair. And then he was like, herding
Yeah.
animals in the winter is stress.
Yeah, you're cold, you're out there, you don't know if the animals are going to freeze to death and all that stuff. Yeah, totally. And you look and they go, that's a season that you're stressed, and you go, okay, it's coming. I can prepare for it mentally. But in medicine, I think there's this underlying stress. And it's funny because when you were saying that, one of the only times I was off the grid in 20 years was I was in Cuba. And there's no cell, you can't use your cell phone. You have no access to anything. So I told my office, look, can't. And I felt such stress at first because you're like, oh my gosh, if something happens, I got to rely on all my partners to take care of my patients and all those kind of things. But once you realize they have no access to you at all, you go, oh my gosh, nothing I can do about it. Whatever happens, happens. I can't do anything about it. So I'm not going to stress about it. And then when I got back in Miami, I opened my laptop and my emails were like, I mean, it was great. You can hear the sound. My friend who's an ER doc goes, what's that? And I go, these are all the emails I've gotten since I've been here. And he's like, can I give you a hug? Man, he like felt bad for me. He's like, oh, in the ER, we leave and we're done. Even though they have a high intensity, you leave and you go, here's the pager. Good luck. I'll see you next week. I'm out. Right. And then they go skiing and have fun. But, so many of us are just on that constant, like, even taking a vacation was stressful because if you take time off, when you come back, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to dig out from under all this stuff. And I'm having a million calls. And, I knew what was coming. And so I'd be stressed before I left and stressed when I got back for a month. Right. It's hard for doctors.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's that constant low level stress that you actually just get so used to that it took me years to come down from the stress I felt in residency to like for my nervous system to really calm down and to realize like I just kept reaching lower and lower levels of like just at ease. And it's like you don't realize until you stop experiencing it that there's just been this hum of stress in the background through everything that you do. And that is like you don't know until it's gone. And then you're like, whoa, I was living in a very different way before.
You just deal with it. So many people. And it's funny. It is a funny thing because I have friends who've retired, and when they retired, they're like, they feel like weird. Like I would say, like if you go bungee jumping, when you start slowing down, then you come up, and then there's this weird thing where you're not going up or down or anything, and you're just sitting there, and you're like, this is weird. Like when I'm going down, at least I know I'm going up. And there's a weird feeling. And I think when people retire, they're in that. Like if your identity is that, I know so many doctors, they retire and they die within 2 months or 5 months, right? And because they don't have any other identity because you're working 80 hours a week. Like you have nothing. Like I'm not a carpenter or spend because you don't have time for that.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have time to build like a more multi-dimensional life. And so then you have all your identity in this one basket and that's all you have instead of just being able to be such a well-rounded human being. And that can look different for different people. You don't have to I feel like sometimes hobbies and stuff can feel like, I don't know, do I have enough hobbies? Do I have the right hobbies? But it's like just having other ways that you see yourself and other like, I don't know, genres where you can exist. I feel like there's so much value to that.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important thing. And the other thing I noticed that's really unique about doctors that I noticed over the 20 years of practicing in a big system is if a doctor gets cancer or they get a bad diagnosis, all the other doctors kind of shy away from them and don't talk to them anymore. Because like you can't get sick if you're a doctor because we're on the other side of that, on the other side of the gown, right? And so it's a weird dynamic I've noticed where doctors get diagnosed with melanoma or something when a doctor, a friend of mine got. And no one like I go, well, let's go visit him. And they go, oh no, I'm not gonna go. Like it's kind of a weird thing
like
that
they're being confronted with like their own mortality and like
our own mortality, and we realize like, oh, I can get those things too. Like we could all like if they're getting it, then we could get it too. And yeah, so it's a hard thing. There's some weird dynamics of that, and I think I think I think the longer you're in the system, the more you get burned. And I watch it. I'm like, as a matter of fact, one of the epiphanies for me as I was getting on a flight back from after I listened to Rob tell his story about calming his nerves and being mellow, and just taking time to write someone a letter of thank you or whatever for helping him when he was a kid, and how much of an impact it had on his life and that calming effect. So I was thinking about it, and I get to the airport and it was packed with people. Like, it was one of those things, like, and I was thinking, look, you got like however many seats, 200 seats on there. Shouldn't you have 200 seats out here where people aren't standing around and everyone's on top of each other and all? And this is right before COVID, as a matter of fact. And I noticed, like, all of a sudden they got really stressed at the front desk, and they go, "We got to get all this back. Like, there's not gonna be enough room for the bags, so we got to check all the bags." And the flight attendants, I remember, they were so stressed out. They were like, "Okay, okay, here's your bag." Like, not, "Hi, welcome to the flight." Nothing. There was no, like, none of that discussion. And then I got on the flight, and one of the flight attendants, a younger flight attendant, was there and goes, "Oh my gosh, you're going to San Diego? Oh, have you been to this restaurant? There's some great coffee down at this place." And this other flight attendant was older, and she was just, there was no smile on her face, and she was like, "Yeah, sit down there." And she was doing, and I was thinking, like, man, this is crazy. And I was thinking, this is what my office is like. Like, people aren't, "Tom, welcome. We're glad to see you." Like, my practice now, like, you're not going to get lost in this crowd out there because there's one person coming in and I'm going to see you. And everyone's like, "Oh, how's the kids? Remember last time you said they were applying to college?" And there's a relationship, right? But, and I was like, I don't want to end up like that flight attendant who doesn't care if she's burned out and she's at the front telling everyone, like, "Here's the emergency exit." And she's just going through the motion. She doesn't care. And she's like, their oxygen mask, because no one's listening, and they're all looking at their, talking to each other and everything. I'm like, she's burned out because no one's listening to her. Like, no one cares. But when everything hits the fan, everyone's going to be asking her for help. And she's going to go, "Look, I just explained it all to you. None of you are listening." I was like, oh, that's what we do as doctors. Like, we tell you, "Look, here's what's coming." Right.
Yep.
And then the disaster comes and they go, "Fix it right now." Or you need disability paperwork. They don't realize, like, you're up till 2 a.m. writing disability paperwork to get you, because it's a lot of work. And then they don't say, "Hey, doc, thanks for doing that for me. I appreciate it." They're like, "Where's the paperwork? I'm picking it up." Like, and you go, wow, they're not appreciated. So that's why this person's, and I saw doctors around me burning out, and I go, they're burned out. They don't care anymore. They're checked out, and you go, wow. And one that you'll like, this is like one of the most horrific things I've seen in medicine. I was in there and I was trying to get home, and I was working, and I heard one of my partners, who was extremely burned out always, not enjoying the journey at all. She goes, "Oh my gosh, this is great news." And the office manager was down the hall, and she said, "What's great news?" "One of my patients just got diagnosed with metastatic liver cancer." And I'm thinking, like, did I hear that right? And the office manager goes, like, "How's that good news?" She goes, "You know what? You can code that. If he lives a long life, I'm going to make a ton of money on that one patient." You go, oh my God, why are you in medicine? Like, what is wrong with you? Like, how could you possibly have any joy in that? Right? Because you're looking at what it does for you and not really care. Like, like, look at their family and all when you lose a patient, you realize, like, you go to a funeral and you see how many people's lives that one person impacts. You
Yeah.
go, oh my gosh, how can you find joy in, like, making a few more bucks?
Yeah, and it's like that sounds like such a villain story, right? But it's like I feel like we've all been that villain at different points in our medical, maybe not to that extreme, but it's like you're just trying to survive in the system. And then, like, I know I would act in ways that I never would anymore, but like I would have patients in labor and I would be like annoyed that they were like screaming in pain. I'd be like, "Oh,"
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah,
just
get over it.
little
I've seen this
things.
so many. Yeah, totally.
But
Yeah,
it's
that's
moments
totally
like
part
that
of
where
it.
you're like, "You know what? My empathy is gone." Like,
Hmm.
it's gone. Like, I literally couldn't find it. And that is just what happens. And so maybe some people have like kind of lose that more quickly than others, but I think it's like the environment that we're in that creates that. And we're all just kind of becoming what the environment
Well,
creates.
it's because you're overwhelmed. If that was your only patient, you could sit down and hold their hand and talk to them. You go, "I got 4 other people I got to deal with right now at the same time. So I can't really be here for 4 hours and hold your hand." That's the thing, is you do lose that at some point. Because I remember thinking, what's wrong right now? And I really had to think about this a lot, is that we're overwhelmed by the number of patients. And a friend of mine who's in direct primary care, actually, I posted something about it, and he corrected me. I said, "We haven't there's just not enough doctors. There's just not enough. If we had more doctors, then it would be better." And he goes,
Mm,
"It's not that we have a shortage of doctors. We have an oversupply of sick people." And you go, yeah,
yeah.
that's the truth, is that if everyone's sick, right? If you're AAA and everyone's car's breaking down every day, you go out of business. But if you get people to take care of their car, then you don't have to go rescue them every day, right? So if everyone's car breaks down, AAA goes out of business. But us doctors say, well, we'll just see you more frequently, and then I'll work more hours, and I won't go home. And then the other
Yeah.
issue, the big issue from a financial standpoint, and like you said, none of us went into medicine to make millions of dollars. We knew that wasn't going to be the case. But when you start realizing over the years, over 20 years of practice, I realized I'm seeing more and more patients every day, and I'm getting reimbursed less. I'm making less money than I did 5 years ago when I saw half as many patients I'm seeing. How is that? Well, because the reimbursement model goes down, the copays go down, and it's like, wait. So, as a matter of fact, at the same time, we were renewing our contract with Blue Shield or Blue Cross, something like that, and our rates went up dramatically. And so the manager called them and says, "Hey, what's the deal? Why is the," and they didn't know who she was. And she said, "Well, it's because all the reimbursement of the doctors is going up." And she's like, "Our doctors are getting paid less and less every year, and you're making more and more. Where's the money going?" Right? It's an admin. And so then you want to take care of your patient, you got to deal with 30 people to get something done, to get an MRI or something stupid, right? And so that's part of that whole burnout. And you're like, I have no time to deal with this person who's crying over here. You know what I mean? That's what
Yeah.
happens. They become an enemy to you because you're like, I'm already seeing 20 patients now. 3 more people want to come in, but they're
Yeah.
sick. They want to have help, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
I learned a lot about myself during those times too. And the other thing that's really interesting is before, when I would get woken up, if I woke up in the middle of the night, I want to go back to sleep. And then after residency, you realize you'll die. Like, you call and you go, okay, give them this, this, and this. Okay, good night. Back to sleep right away. My wife would go, how do you do that? And you go right back to sleep. It's like, you have to, like, you'll die. Like, you need to get your rest. And it's like, you can't, and you can't let people upset you in the middle. So I was always kind and compassionate, but I had partners who would be like, why are you calling me at 2 a.m? Well, they're scared. That's why they're calling you, and you're their doctor. That's your
Yeah.
job, right?
Yeah.
Not to get confrontational and get upset with them, say, hey, so, but if you get upset, then you're not going back to sleep because you're getting your
Right.
adrenaline rush, right? But it's like you're saying, it's that environment of always. So I hope people listening will understand like why your doctor maybe is short with you and why is. I mean, they're in this system that's bad. It's not that the doctor's a bad person most of the time, but that system is killing them and they don't know what the heck to do because they got school loans, they got all these responsibilities and all this stuff that you're hearing us talk about. These are all realities that we're up against.
Yeah. I'm actually more surprised and like really deeply impressed when I see a doctor in the current system who is really present and compassionate. I'm like, I don't know how they're doing that because like obviously that's how we all want to be. I really do believe everyone who went into medicine has that heart and wants to be that. And we just don't have the capacity because of all of the ways that we're trying to survive within the system. So yeah, I feel very deeply impressed and surprised when I'm like, wow.
Yeah, I know.
Really
I
nice.
actually ask people like, "You're in the system. How do you do it?" Like direct primary care docs, when I talk to them, they're all happy and nice. Like when I was gonna get out, they're like, "Brian, what do you need? Let me help you. Here's what I did. Here's the computer system I use." And people are so helpful because they know what it's like and they want to help you and they have compassion for other doctors. Like, and I had friends go, Brian, you're going to die in the system. The system is going to kill you. And I had to really like, but I have a responsibility to all my patients. If I go from, I had 2,200 patients, I think, in my old practice, and I go down to 200 patients. I'm like, wow, that's a lot. If you just
Yes.
think
And how
about,
many podcast listeners do you have now? Like
yeah,
thousands and
yeah.
thousands.
And I had
It's
time to do that too. And it was like, I
yeah.
had to like, people are getting like my old practice, they would get mad at me. They're like, you're taking an hour to do a podcast? Are you kidding me? Like, yeah, I got it. Like, we can help other people. Like, let's get the word out and do what we can because, when you see it, and that's what I realized because even like the time when I came back from Florida, I was gone for 3 days. I was like Thursday, Friday, and Monday. On Tuesday, it was like all hell had broken loose. My nurses, my medical assistants crying. And and she goes, your patients are jerks. They're all screaming at me. I go, why are they screaming at you? She goes, you weren't here on Friday. And like 2 people had to go to the ER. I go, what do they have? Like urinary infection. I'm like, why didn't just some of the none of the partners can see him? And so I was mad about that. I'm like, how could you not see my patient? This is ridiculous. Like 2 days, like one day, just see 2 extra patients. Like, come on, you can't just send people to the ER. But the reality I had to learn was we're all drowning. And if you're drowning, you can't help the other people.
Yeah.
Like someone has to swim to the shore and get on the steps. When you're on the steps, you can help the other people come up. But if you're drowning too, you can't help them. Right. So everyone was drowning in the system. So you realize, like you're saying, like, I hope people understand this point is the system is broken and everyone in the system is broken. And so they're not going to be able to help people. They're not going to say, hey, I'll see 2 of my partners. Because I didn't like it having to see my partner's patients, when they were gone because I was busy. I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's Friday. I'm never going to get home. Like, what time is it? I mean, it's you get to this. That's why you get into this negative, like everything, life's terrible. And you forget about all the people you're helping because it's a small percentage sometimes because you're just throwing drugs at everything.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And you're doing the patient visits but like out of all the things you do in one day, maybe there's one person you have a really genuine moment with where you feel like there's something you said or did that is going to make a difference that you care about. So yeah, I think I like what you said about like we just need to get to shore. And then we can
Yeah.
help people from the dry land, from our own place of peace. And then we can the way we can help people from there is so infinite. It's just like such a massive impact instead of like trying to tread water and just half-ass the way that we're helping people.
So you being outside the system, when you get back, you can look at the system and go, okay, so now that we're giving all the gloom and doom and all the stuff that we've been through,
Mhm.
what hope do we have now? Like, what do we do? Is the system so broken we have to burn it down? Like, I just saw today that the Doge is saying there's $100 billion of waste in the Medicare system. You're like, oh my gosh, like, what? How do we fix this problem? Like, that's overwhelming, right? And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish because as I have all these conversations with people and I have my different view being outside the system, I've also worked with physicians in like on as a coaching perspective in Finland, in other like
Mm-hmm.
Bahrain, in places like all around the world. And it's not just the US and the US system. And so because even when you look at places that you kind of paint as like a utopia of like they have great healthcare and everything's great there. I've actually had clients from like Norwegian and Scandinavian places, and it's actually not as great. So I just think it's like coming back to basics. I think it's like we have all this technology, we have all of these fancy equipment and diagnostic tests, but really, what is gonna make the difference is like the human component, the lifestyle intervention. Like I just think it's coming back to simplicity and basics. I don't know about the system. I don't see it ever being fixed, honestly. Like I really don't see it being fixed. I see it being kind of a grassroots movement of people like you, like moving to direct primary care, moving to just like other ways and modalities of helping people because I think there's too much incentive for the people who are profiting from it to want to change it. And so, yeah, I think of it as like it's going to be kind of a grassroots migration and then things will kind of collapse and
Yeah, I think that's what's going to
they'll,
happen. I'll tell you, doctors listening, because I thought this for years. I was like, you know what? Why am I trying to be more efficient, see more patients, work harder, do all this stuff, and sacrifice my life? And so medicine is a sacrifice, but it shouldn't be a torturous sacrifice,
yes,
right? You
yes.
can work the same amount of hours and be happy, like I do when I'm doing volunteer work in Guatemala. And one of the things I learned, like that really impacted me there, I remember it because I was exhausted. It was a long day. We saw like people were coming from villages like way far away, and it was really busy. And we had a shortage of docs that day because one we were doing two clinics the same day. Anyways, I was thinking, man, this line is never going to end. And so finally, they're like, "We're almost done, doc. You got like 8 more people out there." I was like, okay, like, between the five of us, we'll get these done. And so, anyways, there's one lady, the last one, I was like, oh, they go, "Oh, doc, there's one more." And I was like, oh, gosh, dang it. Okay, like, send her in. And it was an old lady. And she comes in and she grabs my hand, kisses my hand, says, "Thank you for waiting for me, doctor." And I was like, oh my gosh. I go, "How long have you been here?" She goes, "I left my house at 3:30 this morning so I can get here." And like, "And you've been waiting all day?" And she's like, "Yes, thank you for not giving up on me." And I was like, oh my gosh. I go, if I'm 3 minutes late at my clinic, I get yelled at for an hour. Like the whole appointment time I'm getting yelled at. And it's like, holy cow. And it's like, wow, that is amazing. Like, what a gift we have to be able to help someone like that. And we could help her problem. We got her on her way and she was so happy. And it's like, so those kind of things, you realize like we lose those rewards. If you don't have that relationship with people, you lose that. It doesn't take long to make that connection. But if you have 5 minutes or 8 minutes and you always think about the time, I don't have time for this. It's a terrible thing for doctors, really. So I think what you're saying is, and I think that's the answer too, is people leaving the system. But the point I'm making is the doctors are in control. They just don't know it because
Oh yeah.
if these health plans, they go, "You don't like it, we'll take all of our patients." So I'm like, okay, take your patients away because you're paying us nothing. So
Yeah.
I'll find other patients. And I always thought, the other thing is cash pay. Like a lot of people with Obamacare and some of these things that happen, they have a $10,000 deductible. So when they go see the primary charge them $400 for an office visit because that's what they bill insurance, but the insurance is only paying $35. Like, why don't you just charge the patient $40 or something, and everyone's happy? Let them pay cash. If us primary care aren't the ones soaking up the system, right? It's when you have to get MRIs and CAT scans, but even MRI, like I was just talking to someone yesterday, we can get an MRI of the shoulder for $300. So if you're paying $1,400 a month for your insurance, you get a higher deductible, and you go, "I'll pay the $300. I'll put it into health savings account, pay $300 cash, and not go through my insurance." My copay, it happened to me personally with my daughter. to get an MRI was like my copay was $550, I think. And then I was asking like, oh, for people without insurance, what do you do? Like, how do they pay you? Like, what do you? And they go, oh, the cash pay for an MRI, yeah, it was $350. I'm like, I'm paying you 550 using my insurance, and it's
Mhm.
350. She goes, yeah, but it won't go towards your deductible. I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah.
This kid's never sick. So cash pay, here's my credit card, Amex done. And you go, okay, like I can do that as a doctor. I can afford that. $300, maybe not $400, but $300 I can afford. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think you're right. It's like the doctors, we do have agency and authority, and we kind of need to reclaim that back. And it's like each person on an individual basis at a time, but just reclaiming that sense of like, I want to practice medicine in the way that I want to. And how can I do that? Instead of like, they won't let me do that. It's because we've given our power away, even just internally, because you go through the whole process of medicine. And it's a lot of outsourcing of power when you do that because you're like, well, what will get me into med school? What will get me into residency? Let me get my application. Like, what are they going to want? And so we're just like outsourcing our power the whole journey. And then it's hard to reclaim it back when we're actually finally in charge. And so we don't. So a lot of times we just keep the power outsourced to insurance, to kind of entities outside of our control. But at the end of the day, like you've shown, we do have control.
Well, and then the medical boards, there's so much BS out there where they charge you so much money. Like, yeah, you want to be certified, you got to pay this much money. You want to have this? Yeah. Oh, you want to prescribe controlled substances? $888 for each location you're in. I'm like, that's stupid, right? It's a nationwide thing. Well, yeah, but if you have a different address, you have to use that
Yeah.
DEA license. But $888 every time. And you go, this is crazy what we're doing. Like, it's in it. We're hostage to the system. But
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think the thing about doctors is we're supposed to be the best and the brightest and the most compassionate and all that. And so at some point we have to look at our value. Like it's like being in a bad relationship and they're beating you all the time. At some point you go, okay, I'm getting out. That's what I had to look at. I never looked back. You know, I might have taken a financial hit initially for sure, but it's like when you're in an abusive relationship, you're like to get out of that and you could breathe like what you did in residency, you realize, oh my gosh, I can breathe again and I can laugh and I don't have to be stressed all the time. It's like this weird feeling of being under stress because you don't even realize it anymore. It's kind of like in Afghanistan where there's bombs going off all the kids. You see the kids playing and there's a bomb goes off and they're just playing still. Like we would be running and hiding under stuff. They're like, oh yeah, this happens every day. Like you get
The desensitized.
desensitized to stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then it's like once you finally reclaim that, this is something I do with my clients. Like one of my biggest jobs is to help remind them of their value and of their worth. And so I have this one exercise. It's like Winston Churchill has a quote of like, we haven't come all this way because we're made of sugar candy. And so I like have them do an exercise of like, how are you not made of sugar candy? Like, what are all the things that you actually have done? What are the ways that you're like, you've figured things out when it was unknown? What are the ways you've like risen up? What are the ways you've shown persistence? And when they go back and actually look at their track record, they're like, oh, oh yeah, like I can actually do things. And then it's like you just have to rebuild and reclaim your confidence, remind yourself what you're capable of, and then go off and take over the world.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing, and I would say doctors the biggest thing we have is our common sense. And you look and you're like, well, look, all these guidelines, it's not working. The way we've been managing diabetes, like telling people to eat carbs 6 times a day, and you're like giving them insulin every time they're taking carbs, like this doesn't make sense,
That's
guys.
so
It
weird.
doesn't make sense. Sliding scale insulin in the hospital, all these things that we do, and you go, oh, that's just the way you do it. Like no one questions it because the
Mhm.
authority told me to do it, so I just do it and don't question. If you question it, you get in trouble, and they go, "Wait a minute, that's just the way it is." And you go, "But what I'm doing
We're
is
too
different, and
sleep
it's working."
deprived to
And
question it
people are
too.
getting healthier, and they're coming off their meds, and they're sleeping, and they're stressed, and their stress gets better. But it's so much that we've lost that in med. No one talks about stress. And when I was at a conference, I talked about stress and sleep, and doctors were like, Brian, talk about science. Don't talk about this garbage, right? It's like you don't sleep. We all know. We all know if you don't sleep well, you're eating more, you're eating crappy foods, you drink more alcohol, you're more likely to do, make antisocial behavior stuff going on. So it's very clear. And when you talk to people like that, and they go, I just worry about the winter, right? It's like we don't worry all year long, all the time. So stress is not a bad thing if you can control it, and right, if you do it in a short thing, then you recover from
Yeah.
that. But it's the chronic stress, always worried. I was like, oh my gosh, I got to go back tomorrow. That's a horrible way to live your life, really.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, stress without a resolution because it's like it's a cycle that we're supposed to complete. And if we're just constantly bombarded with the same source of stress without a resolution, like we were not meant to live like that.
Yeah, you just give up. It's like those dogs that would get shocked and they would jump from one cage to the other.
Mhm.
If they just randomly shocks them wherever they go, they just lay down and take it.
Yeah,
right?
learn
Even when they open the
helplessness.
doors, the dogs learn helplessness and the dogs can't get out. They don't get out. People have to
Yep.
say, we can get you out. And I think a lot of doctors are just laying there going, okay, this is the system. And it's just bad. I've heard so many doctors over my career say, I'm just doing my job. I'm just doing what they told me to do, right? I'm just following orders. And it's like, you got to think for yourself. You can't just follow orders sometimes. You got to go, if I follow orders and it's not working, I got to change what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Bottom line,
But that's why we're kept sleep deprived, so that we don't have the ability to actually think for ourselves, because everything is like, we get so much brain fog when we're
time. You don't have time. So if you come up with a new idea, doctor's like, I don't have time to look at that. Forget it. It's a bad idea. Don't do it. And I'm like, well, why do you say that? What have you read about it? Well, I haven't, but I just know. I just know. Because if it was good, then everyone would be doing it. They're like, well, that's how medicine changes. We do something different and it worked. If it doesn't work, no one does it anymore. It falls away. So yeah, there's so much to it. And so I have to ask you, like, what's life's best medicine for you, for Chelsea? After going through all you've been through and, life changes and doing what you're doing now, like, where do you go for your strength? What gives you your peace? Like, what keeps you going doing what you're doing?
Yeah, for me, it's appreciating all of the little moments. Having a practice of gratitude, even if it's not my formal at night when I write everything down, but just being in a place of gratitude and having those moments of like micro presence where I just like pause. I'm like, oh, well, this is really beautiful. So yeah, just gratitude. I think it's my best medicine, and gratitude for the really
Mhm.
mundane things within life.
That's huge. I mean, and I think after going through what you went through, it's so important to be able to enjoy the moment, be in the moment. So many people aren't in the moment because they're looking at their phones. They're thinking about what I have to do next week, and you're not in the moment, and it takes a toll. So I think being able to do those things and enjoy the moment, go, this is a great thing. Like I remember saying that to my friends. I go, this day right now, what we're doing right now. In 20 years, we're going, those were the days. Remember that day when we were sitting on the boat and we were just talking about life and we didn't do anything? Remember that? And you go, yeah, I remember. But at the moment, you don't appreciate it. Just like anything, when you're in a foreign country, sometimes you don't appreciate till you leave and you realize, like, wow, what I learned there, what you learn from other people and stuff. So it's pretty amazing. So, and how do people track you down if they want to find you? And especially doctors, are you helping people like all around the? Where are you now, by the way?
Yeah, right now I'm actually in Michigan, weirdly enough. I came back for a family thing, but normally I have a home base in Mexico City, and then I travel maybe
Wow.
like 5 or 6 months of the year. I'll go to different places, sometimes long trips, sometimes short ones. But where you can find me, if you guys are listening to this, you're a podcast listener. And so I also have a podcast. It's called Life After Medicine. So similar wordings, but a little different arrangement. So you can find me there. And through that podcast, I help healthcare professionals discover their purpose and turn it into their paycheck. And that's what I'm all about. And so, yeah, I think podcasts would probably be the best place to find me.
Awesome. Yeah. And keep up the good work. This is it's going to get more and more important because there's burnout issue is
Yeah.
huge. So doctors listening, if you're burned out, make a change. Like it's fear. It's scary. It was scary for me to step out and go, okay, what if I don't make money? What if I can't, provide for my family? But, I think if it's your passion and people see that and you love what you're doing, jump ship. If you're miserable every day you go to work, one of the best pieces of advice, it was from a good friend of mine. And he said, Brian, do you realize we haven't gotten together for dinner in like 2.5 years? We haven't like hung out like on the weekend. And he's a pastor, so it's hard. Our schedule. I go, our schedules are okay. I go, look, let me tell you about my life. And I told him. And he goes, if you were your own patient, what would you tell yourself? And I was like, yeah. Within a year, I was doing my direct primary because all these things, it was like, okay, if
Mhm.
you get hit over the head by everyone it's time to go, okay, like you should be able to take a weekend off and go visit your friends and go hang out because that's what really matters. So many of us think it's going to be about how many patients we see or the more efficiency. And so if you're struggling with all that stuff, it's not that you're inefficient. It's just that you care about your patients. You want to spend the time. You can't rush people through and show the same compassion and help them in that same way. So anyone, if you want to go into direct primary care, let us know. There's ways out. Listen to the podcast. Value yourself. And if you're in a bad relationship, you have to get out of it. Whatever relationship that is, you got to figure out or make it better, right? Or have a better attitude. So be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and everyone. Thanks for listening, Chelsea. Thank you for joining me, and it's so awesome that you came on and because we could really identify and we know how it is.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information, and hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.